There is a lake in the Scottish Highlands that holds more fresh water than all of England and Wales combined. It is 37 kilometers long, 230 meters deep at its lowest point, and so dark with ancient peat that visibility beneath the surface drops to almost nothing within meters. It is called Loch Ness, and for nearly 1500 years, people have been claiming that something lives inside it. This is the story of Nessie, the most famous monster in the world. Long before anyone spoke of a monster, the loch itself was considered an extraordinary place. The ancient Picts, the people who inhabited northern Scotland long before recorded history, left behind carved stones near the shores of Loch Ness. Among the animals they carved, horses, eagles, wolves, one creature stands out, a long-bodied beast with flippers, which some researchers have interpreted as an early depiction of something like Nessie. No one can say for certain what the Picts intended, but the image is still there, carved in stone, at the very edge of the very loch where the monster would one day be reported. The first written account of a creature in these waters dates to the year 565 AD. An Irish monk named Saint Columba was traveling through the land of the Picts on a missionary journey. He came to the banks of the River Ness, the river that flows directly out of Loch Ness, and found local people burying a man. The man had been attacked while swimming. They said he had been seized by what they called a water beast, mauled and dragged under. According to the account written by Columba's biographer, Adomnan, roughly a century later, Columba ordered one of his companions to swim across the river, perhaps to test the creature or perhaps to help retrieve a boat stranded on the other bank. The beast came, it rose from the depths and moved towards the swimmer with its mouth open. Columba raised his hand, made the sign of the cross, and commanded the beast, "Go no further. Do not touch the man. Go back at once." According to Adomnan, the creature stopped as if pulled back by ropes, turned and fled. The monk and the Picts watching from the shore gave thanks for what they believed they had witnessed. This story is the oldest written record of anything like the Loch Ness Monster, but it is important to note Adomnan wrote it about 100 years later after the events supposedly took place. It was written in a tradition of hagiography, the literary form of saints' lives, where miraculous encounters with beasts were a common feature. Whether it described a real creature or a symbolic triumph of faith over darkness, we cannot say. After Columba, the creature largely disappears from the historical record for over 1,000 years. There are occasional references to water spirits and kelpies in Scottish folklore, shape-shifting horses that lured travelers into lochs and drowned them. The kelpie is one of Scotland's oldest supernatural creatures, and more than a few researchers have suggested that Nessie and the kelpie tradition may share the same ancient roots. But it was not until the 20th century that the legend of the Loch Ness Monster truly began. On the 2nd of May, 1933, a newspaper called the Inverness Courier published a short article. A local couple, John and Aldi McKay, had reported seeing an enormous animal rolling and plunging in the loch while driving along the shore road. The article attracted little attention at first, but then on the 22nd of July 1933, a couple named George and Lily Spicer were driving on the same road when they claimed to see something extraordinary. A large creature, roughly 25 feet long, crossed the road directly in front of their car. It had a thick, heavy body, a long, undulating neck, and something that appeared to be a small tail or additional animal-like feature hanging from it. George Spicer later wrote a letter to the Inverness Courier, published on the 4th of August 1933. He described the neck as undulating in a series of half hoops. He later admitted he had written it in haste to avoid exaggerating. The letter triggered a wave of letters from other readers describing their own sightings. The Courier's editor coined the now famous name, the Loch Ness Monster. Nessie was born, and the world would never look at that dark Scottish loch in the same way again. A few months later, in November 1933, a man named Hugh Gray took the first photograph claiming to show the creature, a blurry shape in the water that skeptics immediately compared to a swimming dog. But it was a second photograph, taken on the 19th of April 1934, that became the defining image of the Loch Ness Monster, the image that defined Nessie for the entire 20th century. A dark, graceful neck rising from the water, a small rounded head, ripples spreading outward. It became the most famous photograph of a cryptid in history. It was known as the surgeon's photograph because it was attributed to a respected London doctor named Robert Kenneth Wilson, who did not want his name directly associated with a monster photograph. Wilson himself never claimed to have photographed the monster. He told the press only that he had photographed an object moving in the waters of Loch Ness. For 60 years, the photograph was widely believed to be genuine. It was printed in newspapers around the world. It became the face of Nessie. Then, in 1994, 60 years after the photograph was published, an investigator named Alistair Boyd uncovered documents in the estate of a recently deceased man named Morris Chambers. The papers revealed the whole story. A man named Marmaduke Wetherell, a big game hunter who had been publicly humiliated by the Daily Mail after a previous Nessie hoax, had wanted revenge. Wetherell, along with his son and stepson, had built a model monster neck and head using a toy submarine fitted with a sculpted clay and wood attachment. They floated it on Loch Ness and photographed it. Then, they needed someone credible to present the photograph. Enter Robert Wilson, a friend of an associate, a doctor who, apparently, enjoyed a good practical joke. When the hoax was revealed in 1994, many felt a pang of genuine loss. But the story of Nessie was far from over. Throughout the mid-20th century, teams of researchers, journalists, and enthusiasts descended on Loch Ness in search of evidence. In 1962, the Loch Ness Phenomena Investigation Bureau was established, a volunteer organization that maintained cameras on the loch year-round for more than a decade. Sonar technology was introduced to the loch in the 1950s and 1960s, and over the years, multiple expeditions reported detecting large, moving, unidentified objects deep beneath the surface. None produced conclusive evidence, but none could definitively rule out the presence of something large in the depths either. Then, in October 1987, the most ambitious search in Nessie's history was launched. It was called Operation Deepscan. 20 boats equipped with Lowrance sonar units formed a wall across the full width of Loch Ness and swept slowly from one end to the other. A sonar curtain dragged across the entire loch. On the first day, 3 strong sonar contacts were recorded at depths between 78 and 180 meters. The best contact was tracked for 140 seconds before it disappeared. The contacts were, according to the team, larger than a shark but smaller than a whale. They did not find Nessie, but they could not explain what they had found. From the very first modern sightings in 1933, one theory captured the public imagination above all others. Could Nessie be a plesiosaur, a prehistoric marine reptile that somehow survived the mass extinction 66 million years ago? The plesiosaur was a long-necked, flippered marine reptile that lived alongside the dinosaurs. Its silhouette matched every artistic reconstruction of Nessie almost perfectly. It was a thrilling idea, but modern science has almost entirely ruled it out for several crushing reasons. First, plesiosaurs were reptiles. Like modern crocodiles and turtles, they needed to breathe air. Something the size described in Nessie sightings would need to surface multiple times per hour. A breeding population large enough to sustain a species over thousands of years, dozens of animals at minimum, would be surfacing constantly. They would be impossible to miss. Second, Loch Ness was entirely covered by glaciers until roughly 10,000 years ago. When the glaciers retreated, the loch formed, connected briefly to the sea, then landlocked. Any marine reptile that entered the loch from the sea 10,000 years ago would have been trapped as the land rose. With no new individuals entering, a breeding population simply could not have survived that long. Third, the water of Loch Ness is extraordinarily cold and dark. The food supply, fish, primarily eels and salmon, is estimated at far too little to sustain an animal large enough to match the descriptions given by eyewitnesses. So, if it's not a plesiosaur, what are the thousands of people who have reported seeing something in Loch Ness actually seeing? The most common explanations include large floating logs of waterlogged wood which emerge from the loch bottom when gas builds up inside them, rising to the surface in a shape that could look startlingly like a long neck. Large otters, seals, swimming deer, and even large eels all create silhouettes that the human brain, in poor light and at a distance, is exceptionally prone to interpret as something monstrous. Loch Ness also produces unusual physical phenomena, temperature inversions and thermocline effects that can bend light, creating phantom shapes and mirages on the water surface that look solid and real. In 2018, a team of scientists from the University of Otago in New Zealand, led by Professor Neil Gemmell, conducted the most thorough scientific investigation of Loch Ness ever attempted. They collected 250 water samples from across the loch, from the surface to the deepest points, and analyzed the environmental DNA present in each one. Environmental DNA, or eDNA, is genetic material shed by every living thing in a body of water. Skin cells, scales, mucus species. It is extraordinarily sensitive. If something lives in a loch, its DNA will be there. The results were remarkable. They identified roughly 3,000 different species in the loch, but not a single reptilian DNA sequence was found anywhere in the loch at any depth. There's absolutely no evidence of any reptilian sequences, Professor Gemmell stated. The plesiosaur, the giant reptile, the prehistoric survivor, all ruled out by the most thorough study ever conducted. But the study did find something unexpected, something that has genuinely kept the mystery alive. Eel DNA, everywhere, in every sample, at every depth. In extraordinary quantities. Professor Gemmell noted that eels are very plentiful in Loch Ness, but added, based on our data, giant eels remain a plausible idea. A European eel typically grows to about a meter long, but some deep water specimens have reached extraordinary sizes. Could an eel massive enough and seen briefly in poor light at the surface, account for some Nessie sightings. Over 1,000 sightings have been officially logged since 1933. Hundreds more go unreported. The Loch Ness Monster is listed in the official sightings register, which continues to be updated today. Nessie generates millions of pounds in tourism for the Scottish Highlands every year. There is a visitor centre at the castle ruins of Urquhart, the most dramatic point on the loch's shore that welcomes hundreds of thousands of visitors annually. But Nessie's longevity is about more than tourism. It is about something deeply human, the need to believe that the world is not fully mapped, not fully known, not fully explained. We live in an age of satellites and drones, and sonar and DNA. There are almost no blank spaces left on the map of the world, except perhaps for the deepest parts of Loch Ness. Professor Gemmell himself, who found no monster, no reptile, and no giant creature, said this: "A lack of evidence is not necessarily evidence of absence." Loch Ness keeps its secrets. It always has.